We've been talking about shoftim and shotrim, judges and policemen, and how Hashem loves mishpat. He loves the concept of law and order, which we've now understood does not just mean applying the law, it means innovating in the law, because that's the power that Hashem gives us. So we're able to, and we're even responsible to innovate within Torah. Obviously, in the parameters of halacha, you can't innovate something which goes against the parameters of halacha. So much so, actually, that we're told that every single person has a piece of Torah that's waiting for them to unlock it. That nobody else could unlock except for each individual. Every neshama associates with a particular part of the Torah. The question is, how? Like, in simple English, who do we think we are? Hashem is infinite wisdom. Hashem's Torah is letter perfect. We have a little bit of knowledge here or there. How on earth, to any of us, doesn't matter if we're scholars or not scholars, even if it was somebody who was the greatest scholar in history, the fact is it's still a person, a human, with all the limitations of a human being. How is it possible that Hashem could invite us to be able to innovate in the Torah? On what basis? And now we're going to learn something really critical. And after that, we're going to translate the idea of the judges and the policemen into our own experience. So what are we going to learn that's so powerful is that, remember that in the parable it said, it's a parable of a king, and he wants to give his favorite piece of property to his youngest child. And the question we ask is, why does it have to be the youngest child? Like what's the point of the youngest child? So, in effect, what the parable does there is it illustrates to us what the nature of our relationship with Hashem is. Especially what our relationship is in the context of Torah study. Because for most people, they argue and probably believe that Torah study is all about your intellectual abilities. So the smarter you are, the more you can learn. If a person has a mind that is wired in a particular way, then they'll be good at Gemara. If a person has a mind that is wired in a different way, then they'll be good at other areas of Torah. So most of us believe that the whole experience of Torah learning is all about how intelligent we are. And because that's what we believe, we naturally assume that people who are more intelligent, who typically know more, are closer to Hashem or are more advanced in their spirituality. And that's not true. This is really important information for us. Because what is it about a child? And what is it about a young child that makes a child so endearing, that makes a child so special? It's not their intelligence. Yes, of course, when a child says something that's clever, everybody gets all excited. And especially if it's your own child or your own grandchild, then you get really excited and say, wow, look at this. We have a genius in the family, whatever. But at the end of the day, that's not what endears a child to us, because you get excited about a little child even when they're not doing something which is intelligent. And even when they're at an age where they can't just yet express their intelligence. So what's so special about a little child? In other words, let's look at it this way. Let's say that somebody's just had a baby. And they're all in love with this baby. And you have to ask yourself, from a purely logical perspective, how could you be in love with this baby? You don't even know them. You've just met for the first time. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how many times they're going to be chutzpahdik.
That's so wrong, Rabbi. That's what we call unconditional.
Correct, exactly.
When this little ball of whatever.
Exactly.
You just love him.
Exactly. Exactly, and that's the point.
With a word?
Stubby face.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the point.
Oh.
If I would have said that the relationship that a parent has with a child is a relationship that makes sense, or a relationship that depends on certain qualities, then it would be impossible to love a child from the get-go.
Okay, I missed you. Sorry.
Why does a person love a child from the get-go? Because the relationship is not reliant on anything that makes sense or any of the qualities of that child. It's exactly that point. It's an unconditional love. But I want to know, the staff at the hospital, I'm sure they're very good, and I'm sure they're very warm, but do they have unconditional love for the baby? Never like the parent. It's impossible. It's impossible. In fact, sometimes I imagine that back at the nurse's station, they whispered between themselves, "Sure, that's an ugly one." I mean, so the parents are completely, besotted. What's the difference? The baby's the same age. The baby's just as cute. The baby's just as innocent. The difference is that with a parent and a child, this is a part of me. That's why I have this deep, unconditional love for a child, because this is part of me. This is my DNA. This is a slice of my neshama that is now manifested in a new person. And so the relationship that I have with that individual, with that child, is going to be unlike the relationship I have with any other person. Because every other relationship that I have will depend on the investment in that relationship, and that's going to depend on the assets that the person brings to the relationship. So if there's somebody in my life who brings nothing into my life, I'm not going to have a relationship with them. But with a child, it's not that way, because the child is part of me. That's why in this midrash, where it describes how it is that Hashem gives us mishpat, He gives us the ability to explore and to dig and to innovate in the law, it specifically compares us to a child. Because if our relationship with Hashem was a relationship dependent on our learning and on our observance and on our piety, then you'd say, if you want to be pious, you just got to follow the law. But when you realize that our relationship with Hashem is because we're part of Hashem, then you realize if you're part of Hashem, you have the power to be able to innovate in His law. And that's what's so special about our relationship with the Torah and our relationship through the Torah. It allows us an opportunity, it's an invitation to allow us to connect to Hashem in a very profound way and to be able to find things within the Torah that the Torah itself doesn't know exist. Why? Because we're not part of the community reading the Torah. We're a piece of the writer of the Torah.
I see you use the word innovate all the time.
Yeah.
Not improve.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a paradox, because I mean, what Hashem creates is perfect.
Yes.
So why have we got the right to even consider innovating or improving on them?
So let's put it this way. Let's say that the Torah is absolutely perfect, which it is, to the extent that it's letter perfect. Also, the Torah is infinite, which means that the volume of Torah that's available to us now, you look around the room and you see literally thousands of books. The amount of Torah that is accessible to us now is not infinite. That's why we have the ability to innovate. Innovate doesn't mean that we are creating an insight for the Torah. It means that we are discovering part of the Torah that hasn't yet been exposed, that hasn't yet been revealed. So we're not improving on what Hashem says, but we're innovating in the sense that we are, and every single person has the opportunity to be responsible to extract one piece of Torah from the infinite source of Torah into the finite access that humans have to that Torah. So that's why the term is to innovate, because we're like pulling it out. Now you can't do that unless you are part of the source. If you're not part of the source, how would you find that information? So that's the point. That's the association with a child. The child is the DNA of the Father. So we are, in a sense, the DNA of Hashem. Therefore, we have the capacity to be able to reach into His Torah and to extract parts of His Torah that have never been exposed before. That's why it's to innovate, not to improve. So that concept of being able to find within the Torah and expose within the Torah and, so to speak, innovate within the Torah, that is supposed to be represented by this idea of the shoftim and the shoitim, that you have the judges and you have the police. Now it makes a lot of sense to us. Because originally we said the most important people surely are the police, because the police are the ones who ensure that the law is kept. And if the law is broken, that there are consequences for breaking the law. So if you're looking from the perspective of behavior, the police are critical. And that's why we were surprised. Why do you make such a big fuss about the judges? In fact, we put the judges first. Shoftim ve'shoitim, right? First you have to have the judges, and then you have the police. The reason is because there's something even deeper than just behaving according to the law. The deeper experience is to be able to explore the law, to be able to find things that have not yet been exposed. So those two realities, Shoftim and Shoitrim, play out in our personal service of Hashem. Up until now, we've just been talking about this on the macro level, like the broadest perspective. But when you drill down into our personal experience, you see in our personal experience that this idea of judges and of policemen is something that plays out in every single mitzvah that we do. Also, let's go back a little bit in history and remember what it was like when the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. And Hashem said to them, I have this proposal for you. I'd like to give you my Torah. What was the response?
What's in it?
No, that was everybody else's response.
Oh, yeah.
Right? All the other Midrash tells us that Hashem went to
Naaseh v'nishma.
Naaseh v'nishma. What does that mean? Naaseh means we'll do what the Torah says. Nishma means we'll hear. Now, it doesn't just mean that we'll listen, because obviously if we'll listen, you have to first listen in order to know what you're supposed to do. So you can't have a naaseh. You can't say that I'm going to commit myself to do what Hashem wants before I've heard what it is that He wants. I mean, I can make the commitment, but I can't do it. Naaseh, I can't actually do it until such time as I've heard what it is that He has to say. Nishma means, in addition to the fact that I do what Hashem says, I'm accepting responsibility to hear it, which means to understand it, to appreciate it. Meaning, there are two parts to Naaseh v'nishma. The part that we're always told about Naaseh v'nishma is that the Jewish people were so committed that they said, we'll do everything even though we don't yet know what it is. We haven't yet heard what that entails. And that shows their incredible dedication to Hashem. And that's true. And that's how we're supposed to live our lives as Jewish people. Rather than to wait until we've done a due diligence on every element of a mitzvah, go ahead and do the mitzvah. But there's a flip side that people often forget. And that is, it's not good enough just to do it. Once we've made that dedication, and now we're performing, we're behaving as Hashem would want us, now we have another responsibility, which is to delve, to understand why we're doing this, to understand the meaning behind it. So Naaseh, first you start doing what you're supposed to, and then Nishma, you deepen that experience through the learning that you do, through the understanding that you achieve. That's like the police and the judges. What's the role of the police? To make sure people do what they should. Naaseh. What's the role of the judges? As we've learned, not only to apply the law, but to delve into the law and sometimes innovate within the law. Nishma. So Shoftim and Shoitrim are not just two systems that are required for the society to sustain. There are two systems that are required for our Judaism to sustain. If we want to have a meaningful Jewish experience, we need to have both. Naaseh, commitment to doing what Hashem wants. Nishma, commitment to understanding profoundly why it is that this is what Hashem wants, even to the extent that we discover new perspective, new insight that perhaps other people had never known before. Now you've got to ask yourself the question, why?
So you could actually argue against that, Rabbi, because statutes are things we will never understand.
This
yet
is true.
We do them.
Yeah, this is true. And that's a really good point. So now the question you have to ask is, how many out of the 613 mitzvahs fall into that category of mitzvahs without any rhyme or reason? It's a handful. So we could excuse ourselves from that group and say that group of mitzvahs we're not going to be able to learn and understand because they're just not accessible. But for everything else, we are required to learn and understand. Now the question is, why is that important? In other words, do you prefer to do things that you understand? Of course. Nobody likes to be a zombie. Everybody likes to have some level of appreciation, why this is important, why I'm doing it. If somebody's going to challenge me on it, I should be able to respond to them. Everybody wants to be able to operate that way. But that's not a good enough reason why Hashem wants us to do it. That's a reason why we want to do it. Because we want the satisfaction of being able to understand what the Torah is talking about. But why is it important to Hashem? Why does Hashem say, Shoftim v'shoitrim? Why does Hashem say, Naaseh v'nishma? Not just, thank you for saying that phrase, but actually this is how Judaism works. So the answer to that is a fascinating answer. The answer is that the reason Hashem created the world, the Midrash tells us, is because Hashem had a desire for what is called a dira b'sachtoinim, which means a home in the lowest reality. Now let's think about this one. Let's just unpack this for a moment. What does it mean to be at home? Is that at home just when Life 360 tells you you've arrived at home?
It's about a place of comfort,
A place of comfort, a place of safety. That's what home is. And we're going to focus a little bit more on the side of comfort. The comfort of being at home is, I don't have to put on a show for anybody. In every other environment, I have to conform to certain protocols. So if I'm in shul, there's a way to behave in shul. If I'm in the office, there's a way to behave in the office. If I'm at the gym, there's a way to behave in the gym. At home, I can decide how to behave. I don't have to conform to somebody else's protocols. So if I want to come home and I want to put my feet on the couch, I can put my feet on the couch. I'm not going to do it in your house, right? But in my house, I could do it. And if maybe in your house you don't like a lot of noise, in my house I like to play loud music. It's my house. I can play loud music. So the implication of saying that we want to make a home for Hashem in the lowest realms, home means where Hashem can be Hashem. Because when you look out the window, Hashem is not being Hashem. Hashem is being the creator of a natural order that hides him. In the same way as when I put on the suit and tie, I'm hiding myself. I'm just putting on the appropriate garb for the appropriate interaction that I need. So when Hashem makes the sun rise in the east at exactly the same time, to calibrate it every single day, moving a minute or 3 or whatever it is at a time, and to set in the west at whatever, that's not Hashem being Hashem. That's Hashem being the manager of creation, which is nothing compared to what Hashem is. So we want to have an experience where Hashem could be revealed, where Hashem could be himself in the lowest world, which is our world. Now within the lowest world, let's understand a little bit further. First we'll look at it from the human experience, and from that we'll understand how it relates to Hashem. If you do something because you have to, let's say for argument's sake, a person goes to the doctor. The doctor says, listen here, you have to do some kind of exercise every single day for half an hour to elevate your heart rate. It's very important for your health. So now you do it. Are you feeling at home in that experience? Very often to the contrary. Very often you're feeling like you're going to die in that experience. When a person, for example, is told by their bank manager, listen here, if you don't put away X for your retirement, you're going to be in shtoch. So when every single month you put away X into your retirement fund, do you feel at home in that experience? Or do you just do because that's what you have to do? In other words, the difference between feeling at home or not feeling at home is whether something sits with you, whether it makes sense to you, whether it resonates with you. So if our whole Judaism is just simply going through the motions and doing the things because we're very dedicated and we're disciplined, so it's all very well, we're doing what Hashem wants, but you can't say now Hashem is at home in my life. On the other hand, when I understand what I'm doing and it starts to be something I appreciate, then I could say Hashem is at home in my world. Or to take it from a different angle, if I invite the mitzvahs into my behavior, then Hashem is living in my behavior. But if my mind is not up to date on the value of what I'm doing, then Hashem is not at home in my mind. It's only at home in my behavior. So seeing as I am a thinking human, because that's how Hashem designed me, and by the way, the capacity to think is the part of the human being that is the lowest part in a certain respect, even though it's the highest function of the human being. But in a certain respect, it's the lowest part. Why is it the lowest part? It's the only part of all living things that allows the possibility to deny God, is the human mind. Animals don't have this problem. Only a human being, because of our advanced capacity to think, has the ability to reject Hashem. So if I could bring Hashem into my mind, the part of myself that has the ability to reject Him, then I've made a home for Hashem in this world. So what's more important, the policeman or the judge? What's more important, the Naseh or the Nishma? Practically, Naseh is the most important. because the most important is to get the thing done. But conceptually, in terms of transforming myself and transforming the world in which I live, Nasa is not good enough, because then I've only allowed Hashem access to the periphery, and I haven't allowed Hashem access to what lives inside me. So therefore, every time I learn, and not only learn, but I learn with a view to try to discover something within the Torah that hasn't yet been released for publication, which means obviously I'm going to invest more. If I'm looking, if I'm exploring, if I'm trying to find my point of innovation, then I'm going to learn in a completely different way. It's not just going to be like, okay, I came to the shir and I sat and I went, or take a book and say blah, 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 and then finish and say I read the book. But I'm going to explore and I'm going to debate and I'm going to research. Then I'm inviting Hashem into my life, which is the purpose of creation. That's why at the beginning of this parasha, the Midrash tells us that Hashem says, I don't love anything more than Mishpat. Because what is Mishpat? Not just following the law. Mishpat is probing the law. Mishpat is researching the law. Mishpat is trying to understand how you could apply the law in an area perhaps that nobody yet has thought of. That Hashem says I love more than anything else. Why? Because that's when Hashem says, you invite me into the deepest part of who you are. And that was the purpose of creation. That Hashem shouldn't remain in the heavens, and Hashem shouldn't remain a relationship that is just, technical because we're doing what He says, but the relationship should be personal, the relationship should be deep. We should invite Hashem into our lives. The way that we do that is by investing in studying His Torah to the extent of our abilities.